your intel on the Philippine markets and the economy. In the headlines, the government's outstanding debt will hit a record 19 trillion pesos by the end of 2026 as it plans to borrow over 2 trillion pesos to fund the 2026 national budget. The Marcos administration has requested approval to spend 17 billion pesos as host country of the ASEAN meetings next year. We get more insights on regionalization in an era of tariffs from Federico Poch Macaranas of the Management Association of the Philippines. Positive cues on Wall Street sustain risk appetites here. Net value turnover higher than average at 9.24 billion pesos. Helen Go Oleta, Chief Strategist at RCBC Trust Corp and President of Fund Managers Association of the Philippines, joins us live. The government's outstanding debt is projected to hit a record 19 trillion pesos by the end of 2026 as it plans to borrow over 2 trillion pesos to fund next year's national budget. Data from the Department of Budget and Management shows total debt rising nearly 10% from over 17.3 trillion pesos this year to 19 trillion next year. Latest data from Treasury shows debt inched up 2.1% to 17.27 trillion pesos by the end of June, which is already 99.5% of this year's projected total. Finance Secretary Ralph Recto told the business world the debt remains manageable, with the economy projected to grow to nearly 32 trillion pesos by 2026. For his part, DBM Assistant Secretary Romeo Balangkit notes the debt-to-GDP ratio is expected at 61.3% this year, rising to 61.8% next year, and improving gradually in the following years. Flood control projects facing a 71 billion peso budget cut in the 2026 National Expenditure Program, or NEP. 2 weeks after the president's SONA, where he raised suspicions about the credibility of these projects, the Department of Budget announced lower appropriations of 274.9 billion pesos. They are included in the DPWH's budget, which is facing a 21% cut. Budget Secretary Amena Pangandaman assured funding will go to projects properly identified by the DPWH and MMDA.
Ito po mga programa na to ay pinopose nung dalawang ahensya. So when we went through the budget preparation po, we asked them dun sa aming budget call na dapat pinagplanuhan, hindi lang walang plano, pero may proper planning at may corresponding FS and studies yung mga flood control project. So expect them to fully complete. And tama po yung mga lugar na pinaglagyan nila ng flood control projects.
Pangandaman turned over the 6.973 trillion peso NEP to Congress, where the Departments of Education, Public Works, Health, Defense, and the Interior and Local Government get the biggest slice of the pie. The proposed national budget did not contain any funding for the Ayuda para sa Kapos ang Kita, or AKAP, the cash aid program of Speaker Martin Romualdez. The Senate last year removed 39 billion pesos in AKAP funding, only to be partially restored during BICAM negotiations. Meanwhile, the Budget Department proposed none for Vice President Sara Duterte's confidential funds. The NEP has allocated a 900 million peso budget for the OVP, which is higher than its current budget of 700 million. As for the president's confidential funds, they are facing an 11% cut, though the figure remains north of 4 billion pesos. Economist JC Punongbayan told The Big Story the proposed budget has some serious problems similar to last year.
So the problem is that in the 2026 budget proposal, unlaki, there's still a huge chunk of the funds of the budget that's still in the unprogrammed appropriations. So it seems that we haven't learned our lessons from last year.
To ensure the transparency of the entire process, the Senate unanimously adopted a concurrent resolution live streaming budget resolutions and uploading pertinent documents online. The resolution will be binding should the House adopt the same. Romualdez assures the public that the NEP will undergo scrutiny.
Kapag malinaw ang proseso, malinaw din ang tiwala. In the coming weeks, we will review every page of the net expenditure program guided by one question. Makakabuti ba ito sa ating mga kababayan? If yes, we will support it. If not, we will work to make it better. A budget that people can trust is a government that people can believe in.
The Marcos administration is seeking approval from Congress to spend over 17 billion pesos to host next year's ASEAN summit meetings in the Philippines. Under the 2026 National Expenditure Program, 17.5 billion pesos is allocated for the event, with 10.8 billion earmarked for the Office of the President. The Philippines will assume the ASEAN chairmanship, with Marcos vowing to build on the bloc's achievements and address emerging regional challenges. It's been a week since America's 19% tariffs on Philippine exports took effect, along with zero import tariffs on select U.S. products. As America's tariffs shift the cost structure for Philippine businesses, experts who have come on this program underscore the need to diversify.
I think we have lost competitive edge pertaining to our agricultural products, and so the thing to do there is really to look for other markets for that.
We just have to look for other markets. Okay, since US only about 16%, majority is semiconductor electronics and garments, and also some fruits like the banana and pineapple. No? But they occupy only 16%. We still have 84% of the other export market. Let's just gear up and look for other markets, European markets, or even the Chinese market. Why not?
Our next guest says small economies like the Philippines fare best in trade wars by strengthening institutional frameworks and collaborating through regional and global alliances. With us now is Federico Poch Macaranas, Education Committee Chair of the Management Association of the Philippines. Good to see you again, Poch. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Cathy.
Okay, so I'm thinking about the game theory models we talked about a couple of months ago, suggesting that countries acting alone is in a zero-sum mentality game and often at a disadvantage. Looking back, and after all that's been said and done, did we even get a chance to work with our ASEAN partners to negotiate as a regional trading bloc?
Yes, indeed, the need to work with our ASEAN partners is fundamental to a strategy that we must take in this fast-moving war of unilateral tariff policies. As the newspapers have indicated, the Philippines may have lost in some of the deals bilaterally because we did not consider what may be offered to the other ASEAN countries. For example, the fact that zero tariffs on incoming goods from the United States will hit the Philippines is quite problematic. And even the request of the U.S. to relocate our call centers there is going to be devastating to the economy. But if we were to deal with our ASEAN partners, maybe there can be arrangements where we can negotiate for a region-wide approach rather than just a plainly country-by-country style of negotiation. So I hope that
Do we
the
have
collaboration
Poch? I
with
mean, now
ASEAN
that 19%
deepens.
tariffs are in place, a tariff level that we now share with ASEAN neighbors like Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Cambodia, how much of a leeway do we have in suggesting how best we can leverage our strengths with the ASEAN regional bloc?
Yeah. An example of this would be the classic coconut oil situation, where in the past, tropical fats and oils were cornered by, for example, the developed countries in protecting their own soybean and other kinds of fats and oils. the fact that the Philippines pursued this case even in the GATT, the predecessor to the WTO, indicates that persistently, if we work with the other countries like Malaysia and other tropical fats and oils producers in ASEAN, we can demand a greater leverage.
Okay, find us that leverage then. I mean, how else can we find that leverage? In fact, the PIDS recent note said that the ASEAN members did miss an opportunity to prevent this united front before entering the talks with the U.S.
The leverage will be on a product by product basis because this has to be detailed in the data that we must collect for our negotiation. Unfortunately, I don't think the data have been completely collected yet. And this is the first homework that the president expects of our negotiators as they talk on specific products.
Okay, so not all too late because Trump isn't done yet with the chip sector. He's announced last week plans to impose 100% tariffs on computer chips not made in the U.S. unless the companies make a commitment to build in the U.S. So what can we as an ASEAN member do to get more bargaining power as a regional bloc that could be arranged at all in such a short time?
Dealing with the individual ASEAN countries, the US is able to put its foot without listening to the other countries. For example, when China uses Vietnam to resell products from its country to the US, of course, that's part of the strategy that China would want. But within the GATT and WTO rules, there must be some way of orderly market arrangements that will prevent this. In the spirit of the collaboration, we must look at what's happening to the other groups. For example, in the EU, it's very clear that they have partnered with Canada and Japan on the situation of the excess uh, trade balances in favor of them through the treasury bills and bonds sale that can be proactively coordinated. This is the problem with thinking that trade surpluses have to be answered with import and exports only of goods and services. But in the end, the excess funds that the countries like Japan, EU, and China have on the trade will be used for treasury bills and bonds. And that's where they were hit in the United States. So this is a long-term game plan, I think, of other countries. Rather than focus on trade alone, let's work on these excess funds, the financial markets.
I'm hearing that there's a lot of dependencies there. You've mentioned GATT, WTO, and you've also made a mention of regionalization. So the Philippines hosts the ASEAN Summit next year. What do you think should the Philippines advocate for then, considering that it is host for next year's ASEAN Summit?
Closer coordination so that the multilateral trading system would be restored in its original intent after World War II. The US was a champion of that kind of arrangement, but through the years, when the economy of the US declined and the other countries rose, like China, of course, the US fear of losing its grip on the world economy was the main factor why US thinks that it should not be part of a multilateral arrangement. But this is the problem. The other smaller countries will group not for you, but against you, as they are now doing in the BRICS, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa grouping has now increased to more than a dozen countries. And soon the trade, especially with the Middle East on oil, will be problematic. And now that Mr. Trump has gone to the Middle East to ask not only for oil, but also for investments in other aspects that will deal with rare earth metals, I think this is indication that groupings are more effective than individual countries in dealing with the United States. So the ASEAN must ask for a return to the multilateral trading system.
To learn from, and it's not all too late then. And that is a message that we take away from you. Thank you so much, Poch Macaranas of the MAP. Well, President Bongbong Marcos has signed Republic Act number 12232, postponing the 2025 Barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan elections to November 2026. The law also sets the term of barangay and SK officials to 4 years, with a limit of 3 consecutive terms for barangay officials and 1 term for SK officials. Winners of the next elections will assume office on December 1st next year. The president said the postponement allows the COMELEC to focus on preparations for the first ever parliamentary elections in the Bangsamoro region. 2 U.S. warships, the USS Higgins and USS Cincinnati, were monitored off Panatag Shoal on Wednesday, days after a collision involving Chinese ships in the area. The Philippine Coast Guard says the ships were 56 kilometers from the shoal, conducting freedom of navigation operations. Earlier, China claimed it had mobilized forces to warn and expel the USS Higgins. On Monday, a China Coast Guard vessel hit a Chinese Navy ship after chasing the Philippine ship BRP Suluan, leaving 4 Chinese personnel unaccounted for. Meanwhile, a Chinese fighter jet shadowed a PCG aircraft flying dangerously close during a maritime domain awareness flight. The PCG also reported multiple Chinese vessels near Zambales. Analysts warned the incidents mark a significant escalation and reflect China's push for so-called exclusion zone enforcement in Panatag Shoal. You're watching Money Talks. Coming right up, Bloomberry Resorts posts a net loss of 1.4 billion pesos in the second quarter. And Helen Go Oleta of the Fund Managers Association of the Philippines joins us in a few minutes. Keep it here on One News. Okay, Helen with us, and the shot is fine. Welcome back to Money Talks. I'm Cathy Yang. U.S. markets rose Wednesday as investors remain hopeful of a rate cut in September. The Dow led equities advancing by 1%. Both the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq reached fresh highs, with the S&P up by 1/3 and the Nasdaq by 0.1%. Benchmark 10-year Treasury yields ticked down to 4.239%, and gold prices snapped a 2-day losing streak to end at $3,358 per troy ounce. In Asian markets, Japan's Nikkei 225 breached the 43,000 mark for the first time, ending yesterday's session higher by 1.3%. Asian equities, a mixed bag this Wednesday. South Korea's Kospi jumped by 1%, and Australia's ASX 200 slid by 0.6%. As for U.S. futures, they're pointing to slight declines when the markets open later tonight, Manila time. The Dow, S&P, and the Nasdaq all down by less than 0.1%. Asian markets mostly down in the first hours of trading this Thursday. Nikkei is down by 0.8%, Kospi falling by 0.25%, and the ASX, meanwhile, is up 0.6%. Let's see how the markets are performing this Thursday here in the Philippines, with the PSEI opening today higher by 1/3% to 6,346. The stock market rose yesterday, Wednesday, by over 0.5%. Regina Capital said investors were buoyed by the slew of positive corporate earnings. The broader all-shares index also rose by 1/3%. As for the Philippine peso, it opens today a tad stronger, 56.70 to the dollar. Peso strengthened yesterday, returning to the 56 mark. And 10-year government bond yields ticked up to 6.106% from the previous close of 6.087%. With us now for more is Helen Go Oleta, Chief Strategist at RCBC Trust Corp and President of the Fund Managers Association of the Philippines. So good to see you, Helen. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Cathy.
Okay,
Thank
so
you for
how
having me.
have your strategic and tactical considerations evolved given the prevailing risk events there, the tariff uncertainties, monetary policy outlook, and corporate earnings, the recent ones?
Actually, for us in RCBC, we're majority a peso house. So majority of our clients are focused more on the fixed income. They want the accrual coming into play as we invest in all these assets. So for us, we just do a shift of ±5 to max of maybe 7-8% in terms of movement, but majority still is on the fixed income assets. If we all know that the interest rate as of this time is expected to be reduced in the upcoming August 28 monetary board meeting, and also on the Fed September 17-18 meeting. So I guess you can see a lot of action in the fixed income before the announcement of the RTD. If you look at the RTD at 6%, it's very much a good entry point for most of the investors. That's why we see the size being capped by the Bureau of Treasury to make sure that everyone is served from online to the proprietary to the trust group or the retail side of the business. So everyone's excited to see good momentum on the interest rate. So without this RTD, I think the market's already trading as of this time 20 basis points lower than the current RTD offer.
Talk to us about the RTB offer, because that's really been gangbusters. A lot really interested, in fact, oversubscribed earlier than forecast. What's driving the demand? Apart from interest rates, of course, are there other overarching reasons why people are going to fixed income?
I think for one, if you look at the corporate bond issuances, the spreads on the corporate bonds versus the may not commensurate, mainly because there's so much liquidity in the market. That's why people would rather go to the sovereign issuance, and that's the retail treasury bond, number one. Number two, it caters to retail. So even as low as 5,000 pesos, you can participate. Unlike when you trade in the corporate bond market, there's a higher minimum, I guess. So that's another aspect. Number three, everyone knows that with the benign inflation, and hopefully it will just be below the range of a 2 to 2.5, maybe max, going to the next 2-3 years, then definitely it would be a good investment opportunity. That's why a lot of people are jumping in. Number one, aside from the fact that we had a huge jumbo maturity last August, and also upcoming this September, there's also another maturity which is around less than 300 billion. So those two maturities really need to be the appetite needs to be captured in this market. So that's why you see a lot of people going into the retail treasury bonds. So the mindset of having a fixed. Sorry.
Did CIMEPA play a role? I mean, a lot of people think this is just stock transaction taxes coming off, but CIMEPA really stands for capital markets. Did it drive funds into fixed income rather than stocks, even as stock transactions have come off 20% there?
Actually, if you look at the CIMEPA, the main, as you mentioned the sales transaction tax plays a very important role. Why? Because the possibility of you churning with our tight range of around 6.2 to 6.5 range, churning is very, very crucial for us to generate more returns, compared to peers. So if you look at the reduction of the SUMEPA, which is around 50% on a churn basis, there is value to it. That's why in terms of trading the market, while we don't see any, while we're waiting for the break of the 6,500, we can churn. So that is a good thing. And if you look at SEMEPA charging, removing the 5-year and beyond tax exemption, actually, if you look at that, all the holders existing still enjoy it until the rest of the remaining of the 5 years that they had. But the new ones can now go to the bond issuances of the bank. So I guess on the part of the bank, you can see that there's additional cost for them to put a premium over the current bond, GS, or the government or sovereign borrowing. So I guess that also channels in the market into the bond market. So yesterday we've seen around 60 billion churn in terms of which is healthy for us. So we want to see more of that. And so there are a lot of efforts from the central bank to the Securities and Exchange Commission to the PSE, into also in the Insurance Commission, pushing in to develop our capital market. So everyone's playing their role, also FMAP. So hopefully, one by one, we can move towards what our peers, neighboring peers, are already into. So we can do a lot of catch up, actually.
Did you just say 6,500? We got about a minute. What sort of a timeline are you looking at on the PSEI then?
If you see more, I mean, we've heard PSP Governor Madonna saying that there's 2 possible cuts and possible open for another one. So I guess this sudden, these expectations of a more rate cut would push the market. But actually, Cathy, if you look at it now, we're 6.3, that's just 200 points away, but it seems so near and yet so far, right? So I guess it's more of us seeing with your investment now 50 basis points lower, where do you want to go this time?
Right. It's been bouncing around, very tight range.
Yeah.
That's why I asked.
Yeah.
But thank you for the insights. Really appreciate it. Helen Gooleta of RCBC Trust Corp. And in corporate news, Ayala Corporation's core net income slips in the first half of the year due to lower contributions from its telco and energy assets. Core earnings, which exclude one-off items, hit 23.7 billion pesos from January to June 2025, down 2% from the same period last year. Including one-off items, Ayala's net income grew 5% to 23.4 billion pesos. Ayala said Globe and AC Energy and Infrastructure Corp saw softer earnings in the first half of the year, but higher contributions from BPI, Ayala Land, and other portfolio businesses cushioning the impact. Bloomberry Resorts posted a 1.4 billion peso net loss in the second quarter, reversing its 1.3 billion peso net profit last year. This as softer gaming volumes hit its flagship Solaire Resort Entertainment City. Gross gaming revenue slipped 1% to 14.3 billion pesos on continued weakness in the VIP and premium mass segments. Meanwhile, consolidated earnings before EBITDA fell 30% to 2.5 billion pesos amid softer gaming volumes from Solaire Resort Entertainment City and operating expenses of the company's new online entertainment platform. And before we go, Gilas Pilipinas bows out of the FIBA Asia Cup with an 84-60 quarterfinal loss to Australia. Australia pulled away early, building a 29-12 lead in the first quarter, fueled by Owen Foxwell and Jalen Galloway's 15 points each. Kevin Kiambao scored 17 for Gilas, but it wasn't enough to mount a comeback. Coach Tim Cone lauded his team's unity, but admitted they fell short in execution. Gilas now shifts focus to the FIBA World Cup qualifiers, facing Australia, New Zealand, and Guam. Thanks for giving us a good fight, and the fight carries on. Good luck, FIBA Pilipinas. And that is it. For Money Talks, I'm Cathy Yang. Catch us again tomorrow, 9:30 a.m. here on One News. Have a great day ahead.